All right, it's that time for the SETI report again. Dr. SETI, what do you got for us here today?
Thanks. Great to be with you guys. Joe, always good to be with you. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. So, today I'm going to talk about the interim Pfizer study. This is the interim data on the Pfizer study, the vaccine trial that was conducted at the end of 2020. And now we have some very, very interesting information to report. This just came out on a preprint server just a few days ago. We're going to talk about the efficacy of the vaccine after the last 6 months. Recall, we only had about 4 to 5 weeks of data from the initial study, and now we have much more information. We're going to talk about how good the vaccine is against severe COVID, adverse events, and what to expect in the future with this trial and what's left to be discovered. So let's dive right into it. The first thing I'd like to bring up is a table from the supplementary index of the study, and this is the how the vaccine is doing in preventing COVID infections. So the title of this table is called the vaccine efficacy overall and by subgroup after dose one. And the way I look at this table is to look at the column labeled VE percent. That means vaccine efficacy. So in all of these subgroups, it tells you how good the vaccine is in preventing the occurrence of COVID-19. And you can scroll through this quite quickly, and you see that the numbers are about in the high 80s to low 90s. That reflects what the initial study back in 2020 demonstrated. About, 95% efficacy, 90% efficacy. And as you go through this, you will see, and this is what I want to point out, if you can find this, in Germany, there's a vaccine efficacy of negative 104.5%. So the reason why I bring this up is that the reason why that number is negative is that there happened to be one case that was in the placebo versus two in the vaccine. So that's a trivial piece of data, but I demonstrate it here to show you how these numbers change. So I'm going to be very clear here. That doesn't mean the vaccine is terrible. I'm saying in that one particular subgroup, that's where the vaccine did not work. In fact, it was protective not to get the vaccine. But moving down further, this is what I want to bring your attention to. Baseline SARS-CoV-2 status. That is the row we're looking at. In other words, these are the people who had documented previous infection with COVID. Okay? In other words, people that, folks like me think are protected against COVID and don't require a vaccination. And what we see here, if you go down to the row that says positive NAAT, that means a positive PCR test. So these people had a positive PCR test for COVID, but yet were enrolled in the trial anyway. And what we see is a vaccine efficacy of minus 10.5%. What does that mean? That means that there were more people in the vaccine group that got COVID than in the placebo group. These are the people that had previous COVID-19 infections. Now, the reason why this is important is that right in the beginning, before this data came out, the CDC was telling everyone that they should get the vaccine. You remember that, Joe? That's
Yep.
what they said. And I was like, how do you know that natural immunity is not robust enough to match that of the vaccine? And now we have demonstrable proof that says, actually, you don't need the vaccine if you've had previous COVID. And I think that's a very important point, not simply because we know that natural immunity is better, but it points out the fact that the CDC was making huge assumptions. There are many, many people in this country. Some people say it's upwards of 30 to 100 million people that have been exposed to COVID. These people don't need the vaccine. That's what that number demonstrates.
That's one-third of the population almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when we have Senator Rand Paul, saying he doesn't want the vaccine because he's already been exposed, he's right. That's exactly right. We should know that. And when he gets denigrated for taking that position, it's not based on any science. He's actually representing what we should know about the basic tenets of immunology. Next, I'd like to take us to the to table S6. Now we're going to look at how the vaccine has done against severe COVID. And the reason why this is important is because that's what the vaccine was designed to do, not to prevent infections, but to prevent severe infections. It was meant to keep people out of the hospital, right? I hope we all understand that. So if you go down to table S6, severe COVID-19 occurrence after dose 1, what we see here is in the vaccine arm, in other words, not arm, but the vaccine group, there was one case of severe COVID. And in the placebo group, there were 30. That means the vaccine's efficacy was 96.7%. That's correct. That's a great, great number. However, what does this mean? We're talking about 29 more severe cases in the placebo group. It's a big, big plus for the vaccine manufacturers. The first point is, what does severe COVID mean? Well, it's defined in the literature of the trial, and it requires extra oxygen. It requires pressors. All of these symptoms of really severe COVID that need medical attention. The reason why I want to look at that number is that, as we see, there are 29 more people in the placebo group that suffered these kinds of consequences from COVID. It's very important. But now, let us look at adverse reactions, and specifically, severe adverse reactions. So now we're looking at table S3. Okay, this is participants reporting at least one adverse event from dose 1 to 1 month after dose 2. Now, the first point here is we're going to look at the row called severe adverse event. We see that the vaccine group had 262 severe reactions to the vaccine compared to the placebo, which is 150. So there were 112 more severe reactions from the vaccine than the placebo. Now, here's what's interesting. They don't define what a severe adverse event is anywhere. We have no idea. These presumably are things more concerning than a sore arm or a temporary fever and headache. These are severe. We don't know what they are. But if we're going to compare apples to apples, what are we supposed to say? Because the risk of severe COVID, or the number of severe COVID cases that were avoided by the vaccine, was 29. However, with severe adverse events, there are 112 more in the vaccine group. This is a matter of concern, in my opinion, because it seems to me that there are far more severe reactions to the vaccine than the avoidance of severe COVID. So this has to be considered very carefully, and I think we should be demanding that Pfizer tell us what they meant by severe adverse event. They don't define that. They only define it for severe COVID. So that is a takeaway point on this.
Yeah, I was going to say one quick question on that is, did they happen to delineate within the study there, what age groups or potential comorbidities or anything like that came with the people that had the adverse reactions, or was that unclear as well?
That is unclear as well. It's not specified anywhere. So okay. This is as far as we can go. Look, we're just trying to look at it objectively based on what they're telling us. We're not jumping to conclusions that we can't make. We're just looking at the data itself, and they do not tell us. While we're on this table, the other important point here is if you look at the row under any event that's labeled related, there's a superscript, C. And we can see that what they mean by C is it's been assessed by the investigator as related to the investigational product. So Pfizer's investigators are saying that all of the adverse events in the related column, related row, are due to the vaccine. Okay, there's no like, well, we can't tell if it's the vaccine or it just showed up spontaneously. Pfizer themselves are saying that it is a result of their product. How many are there? 5,241. 5,241. That's 23.9% of the people getting the vaccine had some sort of adverse event directly related to their product.
So when we extrapolate that out and we say, okay, there's 262 that were considered severe in terms of adverse events out of the 5,000 or so adverse events that were reported in the Israeli study. If we were to kind of look at that and say, what percentage of people getting vaccinated, at least in this study, were having severe reactions? Because we know it's 23% on the adverse reaction side, so sore arm, headache, whatever. But on the severe side, what percentage might that be of, if we were to extrapolate out and apply it to the US, how many people could have had severe in the US if the data changed over?
So in the parentheses are the percentages, right? So a severe, 262 severe adverse events constitutes 1.2% of the people getting the vaccine.
Right.
Right? So your logic is good. How can we extrapolate to the general population? So 100 million people getting the vaccine, 1.2% of them is 1.2 million.
Right.
Severe. We're talking severe. This is, again, we don't know what Pfizer means by severe. They don't define what severe is.
Yeah.
But, again, apples to apples, severe adverse event versus severe COVID. You avoid severe COVID.
Yeah.
And you get severe reactions.
Right. And I think the interesting part of that is kind of if you look at death rates, even for example, of COVID, I mean, across the total population, I mean, it's less than 1.2%. So you're almost saying that the intervention could provide a severe, maybe a worse situation than the actual disease itself, depending on what is meant by severe adverse reaction.
Yes, that is a true statement, but that's a reasonable statement because we have to weigh that against how many severe cases of COVID are being avoided by the vaccine, right? And that's what I was referring to when we compared the number of severe COVID cases that were prevented, which is 29. Mm-hmm. Yet we have 112 more severe adverse events from the vaccine. Now, let's be very clear here. To people who are skeptics of what I'm saying, well, you can't compare severe COVID to severe adverse events because there's long haulers, there's all this stuff. I know that, but this is what they're telling us. I'm comparing what is severe from the vaccine and severe from COVID. Yeah. We don't know. That's what I'm saying. Pfizer needs to be more transparent by what these severe adverse events are. And in general, we can say that severe adverse events related to vaccines can be very severe. Yeah. Prolonged neurologic symptoms, Guillain-Barré, permanent injuries. These are all known complications of vaccines. So, who knows how many of those 262 are permanent injuries? We don't know, but that's what we can go on.
Yeah.
We're going to go to table S4, and S4. This is a particularly important point to make here. Okay, this is a table that tells us who died. Okay. Now, the reason why I want to bring attention to this is that science reporter Alex Berenson, I don't know if we all are aware of who he is and what he said, but he was threatened to lose his Twitter platform for a number of reasons, but one of the big claims he made was that there were more deaths in the vaccine group than the placebo group.
Yep.
Okay? And so he concluded, look, the vaccine doesn't work. There's the same number of people dying in both groups. And I believe he made that conclusion from this particular table, which lists deaths in the first column, which is the vaccine column, as 15 versus 14 in the placebo. However, that is actually not the case, because if you go and look at the causes of death of the 15 and 14, the fifth row down is COVID-19, and there are 0 deaths in the vaccine group and 2 in the placebo group. Okay? So Alex conflated what those numbers mean, because he was stating that, oh, these must be COVID deaths. No, these are just deaths that occurred.
Yeah, during the trial.
During the trial, exactly. So, and this is where I hope all of you out there can recognize the fact that we're not trying to be sensationalistic and monger fear. We're just looking at the numbers. This is what the study shows. And again, I think it's extremely important for the population in general and for our audience to recognize what we can and cannot know.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to say, well, I'm not sorry to say, I want the population to recover from this pandemic, but it's not fair to say that more deaths from COVID were occurring in the vaccine group. That is untrue. I hope that's clear to everybody.
Yeah.
So to conclude, and this is where, this is what's shocking to me. And now we're going to leave the supplementary data and bring up the actual text of the trial. And let's go down to the bottom of page 7. And this is what I find, honestly, the most concerning. And you can read the quote yourself, but what they're telling us is that most of the people in the placebo arm have now received the vaccination. It's just sort of slipped in there at the end of the paragraph, right? But that is an enormous fact, because I hope we all can see, now that you've vaccinated everybody, how are we ever going to be able to tell what are the long-term side effects of the vaccine and what are the long-term protective effects of the vaccine? How can you know if you've vaccinated everybody? This is really, really concerning to me. And this is something that I brought up months ago at the end of 2020 when we did a conversation called Gaining Clarity Around the COVID-19 Vaccine. This is one of the points I was making, which was there was talk about vaccinating everybody in the trial, which happens when you do a trial in rare circumstances. And as I said back then, if you are taking a group of people with incurable diseases, right, and you're subjecting them to an experimental treatment, one that has not been approved, they're in a trial, there are situations where the experimental drug seems to be providing some survival benefit for these hapless individuals with a terrible disease, and you are ethically compelled to stop the trial and give everyone the treatment. You follow me?
Yep.
Yeah. So what are the conditions for that situation? The conditions are there's no treatment for these people and they're going to die if we don't do something. So let's end the trial and give everybody the experimental treatment. That is not the case here. We're talking about a preventive measure for a disease that is treatable. And so 6 months ago or 8 months ago, I was saying this is, I hope we don't do that, because we lose an important signal when we vaccinate everybody. And that is, in fact, what has happened here. From this point forward, how will we ever know if the vaccines are having long-term adverse events, long-term side effects?
Yeah.
We won't, because everybody got vaccinated now. And so I'm stupefied, honestly, that this has happened
Yeah.
because, as far as I'm concerned, they've closed the curtains on this experiment. We won't know going forward
Yeah.
how good the vaccine is compared to placebo, or how bad the vaccine is compared to placebo. All
Yeah.
bets are off now.
And that's an interesting point. There's actually two things there. I mean, one is there are some doctors doing some observational studies around the world with, their patients that have been getting vaccinated, and some of their observational studies are looking at potential. They're seeing illnesses that may not necessarily be severe reactions, but illnesses that might show up as potential death a few years down the road. They're observing that. They're concerned, right? So that's a key point as to why that's so important. But the other thing there, when you mentioned that, we're this is treatable. Now, obviously, this is a very controversial subject of is COVID-19 treatable. I think a lot of people who watch mainstream media and listen to the government might believe that this is not treatable. Obviously, ivermectin's become an extremely controversial issue. People arguing all over the place. There's studies being retracted, different things going on. It's a very difficult to get a clear signal on what's happening with ivermectin. Is that what you meant by treatable?
Yes, that's exactly what I meant. And the reason why people who listen to mainstream media believe that's a spurious argument that it's treatable is because the CDC never acknowledged at the time that it was treatable.
Yeah.
We have experts, people that I would consider my teachers in critical care medicine, who are highly published, that were coming forward. I'm talking specifically about the Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance, that were talking about ivermectin months and months ago, saying, why aren't you acknowledging this? Because we can treat people. But even putting ivermectin aside, if you've got problems with ivermectin and you think it's just a horse medicine for, veterinary applications, it's not. What I'm trying to say here is that the vast majority of people will recover from COVID without any treatment whatsoever. So if you don't believe that ivermectin works, it's okay. It doesn't matter. You don't need it. Most people don't need it. You're going to recover anyway. And I'm not discounting the fact that some people have long hauler COVID symptoms, but we can treat it. We know that now. It's just a matter of getting to a physician that's willing to consider the fact that there's an enormous amount of data that supports the use of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine in treating COVID.
Yeah.
That's an important point. And the other thing I want to say, which is what you brought up a few minutes ago, is the kinds of long-term effects from vaccines are very, very hard to pin down as causation.
Yeah.
Because we are modulating the immune system. We could make it hyperreactive and cause. The immune system is basically there to distinguish what is self and what is not self. And if it gets confused, it starts attacking different parts of your body. That's what autoimmune disease is. And for people who poo-poo the vaccine cautionary sphere as, you're making correlations, there's not causation, it's like, I know, we have to. And when we take away the signal, when we do not have a control group, a placebo group, it is impossible to prove that there is a correlation now. Forget about causation. You can't prove a correlation. And so here I invite people to consider the fact, could this be the reason why there is this enormous push to vaccinate everybody?
Yeah.
President Biden says he wants 70%. You up in Ontario are saying that your administrators want 80, 90% compliance. That's an unprecedented number for vaccine compliance. We're never going to get there. Why are they pushing us to these great numbers? And again, I'm speculating here, but if we did, we would not have a control group even in the population. So this is where I feel we should really, really be protecting those people who are unvaccinated. So at least we have a better indication of how safe these vaccines are and how effective these vaccines are. We need to have a control group. And a great control group would be those people who have already been exposed to COVID. Because now Pfizer themselves are saying, in one of our points we just made earlier, that the vaccine does not help people who have had COVID before. So at least protect those people from the vaccine.
Yeah. Well said. I think there's a lot to think about here. This is a really great breakdown of what's going on with some of this vaccine data. Thanks again so much, Madhava, for an excellent study report. And yeah, look forward to the next one.
You're welcome, Joe, and thank you everyone for tuning in. I respect your curiosity and need to get to the bottom of things. Stay sharp, everybody.